Hello everyone, and welcome to the 246th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring the characters and themes of the Babadook. Now I'll admit, when this movie came out in 2014, I wrote it off. I thought it had a stupid name and that it was going to be a similarly stupid horror movie, and there was no one around to convince me otherwise. Now that I've seen the film myself though, I know just how horribly wrong I was, because this movie is without a doubt one of the best horror movies that I've ever seen, with the titular monster of this film being great, but not even close to being the reason why this film is so excellent. For that honor goes to what the Babadook represents, and it represents it well. So I figured this story would be a good candidate to kick off this year's month of horror festivities. And so here we are. And you know what? Let's just get right into things. So without further ado, let's begin. There aren't many pains in this world that can trump the loss of a loved one. And the idea that anyone we love can become lost to us at a moment's notice is a hard truth that all of us have to live with, especially when it's premature. Every single one of us has an expiration date. There's a point in all our lives where we'll reach the limit of our respective natural lifespans and perish. And when someone close to you dies naturally, it's still a tough thing to deal with, but it's nowhere near as painful a loss as it is when they go prematurely. And for Amelia Vanek, the premature loss of her husband, a loss already destined to be one of the most painful she ever experienced, occurred at one of the worst moments possible. 7 years prior to the beginning of this story, Amelia was pregnant with her son Samuel, and as her husband Oscar was escorting her to the hospital on the night Amelia went into labor, they were involved in a car accident that took Oscar's life, but spared Amelia's and Sam's, with Sam's life beginning on the very night that his father's ended. Now losing your spouse is, out of all the losses of a loved one a person can suffer, one of the most soul-crushing. A spouse isn't someone you just choose to build a relationship with. They're the person that you've specifically chosen and identified as your other half. Your soulmate, who is as much a part of yourself as you are a part of them. And to lose an entire half of your own soul is a pain that will echo within you for the rest of your life. This is what Amelia experienced that night, and what she would continue to experience years afterwards. But not only did she have to endure this horrific pain, but she had to live with an ever-present reminder of that night that would continue to haunt her day in and day out. Her son. Now, when you've had a child or children with your spouse, you're always going to be reminded of them when you see the face of your partner in theirs, or their personality in their personalities, which is something that can be both comforting and discomforting. However, when you lose your partner in the way Amelia did, it's not just the reminders of your spouse that you find in your child's physical features and personality that's discomforting. It's their very existence. For as much as Amelia loved her son and saw him as the blessing he was, she also had horrible, nearly uncontrollable thoughts coursing through her mind on a daily basis. He would still be alive if I had never gotten pregnant. He would still be alive if I hadn't gone into labor that night. He would still be alive if it wasn't for you. It's these thoughts born from an incalculable grief that few of us can or care to imagine, that brought the Babadook into the Vanek home. At the beginning of this story, we find ourselves viewing the life of this family around the time of year when this accident occurred, the time of Sam's birthday, which Amelia has chosen not to celebrate on the actual day since he was born, due to how much pain it causes her. And when we're first introduced to Amelia, we find a woman who is still overwhelmed by the grief she experienced all those years ago, even more so at the time we meet her now that the year is advanced to the date when she experienced her greatest tragedy in life. She struggles with nightmares of the night her husband died, and she struggles further as her young son becomes restless at night with ideas of monsters haunting their home. Sleep deprived, bogged down by depression, and forced to deal with all the joys and perils of motherhood, Amelia is a miserable woman who lives through life half awake, disheveled, and distraught, working a job at an elderly care facility that's nearly as mind-numbing and soul-crushing as the melancholy that walks beside her every second of her life. Now, as I mentioned earlier, her son being an ever-present reminder of the loss of her husband is bad enough. But what really pushes Amelia's mind further into a bottomless pit of despair is the disposition of her son. Like his father, Sam always speaks his mind, whether that be something cute and charming or a thought that's best left where it came from. Sam is also quite rambunctious and high energy, with a fixation on magic, homemade weaponry, and monsters that cause him to get in trouble at school, with his own family members, and his mother as he wears down those around him both physically and mentally, with his many quirks. These things don't make Sam a bad kid, not at all, but he's clearly obnoxious as far as those who surround him are concerned, something that's not uncommon for children to be from time to time. But his behavior seems to be a constant blight that all who surround him are loath to suffer, especially his mother, which becomes more and more apparent as we soon find Sam getting in trouble at school. And with some less than caring staff insulting her and her son, Amelia makes the choice to take him out of that school and find him another, putting her in a situation where she now has to juggle her child's care more than she had to before, alongside her job. Soon after, Amelia and Sam attend her niece's birthday party, and after his cousin bullies him and Sam pushes her out of her treehouse, Amelia is left to care for her son full-time with no one around to support her, as her sister chooses to essentially abandon her due to her son's behavior, the only person in her life that Amelia could truly rely on. However, after the incident at Sam's school, we start to learn that Sam's behavior might not just be your average unfortunate behavioral issues of a hyperactive child under the care of a stressed-out parent. The night after this incident, Amelia settles in to read a story to Sam as she does every night after she's checked under his bed and in his wardrobe for any monsters, this time reading for him a book of his choosing, a book that's titled Mr. Babadook. If it's in a word or it's in a look, you can't get rid of the Babadook. If you're a really clever one and you know what it is to see, then you can make friends with a special one, a friend of you and me. His name is Mr. Babadook, and this is his book. A rumbling sound then, 3 sharp knocks. Baba, baba, dook, dook, dook. That's when you'll know he's around. You'll see him if you look. This is what he wears on top. He's funny, don't you think? See him in your room at night, and you won't sleep a wink. I'll soon take off my funny disguise. Take heed of what you've read, and once you see what's underneath, you're going to wish you were dead. A disturbing read to find in any children's book, but one that's made all the more disturbing when you consider Amelia had no idea where this book came from, but it only gets so much worse from here. Sam becomes fixated on the Babadook after the story is read to him, and after having a tantrum in front of the wardrobe his mother hid the book on, she chooses to tear it to shreds to excise the threat this odd book has brought into her home. Following the incident at the birthday party though, Sam suffers a seizure in the car on their way home after raving about the Babadook and the imminent threat it poses to him and his mother, something that at this point seems to be brought on by the stress he's endured as a result of his behavior and the clear strain that his mother is under as she suffers the effects of it as well, something that she verbalizes to him before the seizure occurs by asking her son why he can't be normal. Again though, at this point, there's nothing outside of a child's fantasies that indicate any of this is happening due to anything supernatural, as the overactive imagination of a problem child who then suffers a medical emergency isn't cause for anybody to point to demons being the culprit. But that all changes when a certain destroyed book reappears on Amelia's doorstep, something that happens just as she finally receives a bit of relief with the help of her son's doctor and the sedatives he gave him. Ba ba ba, dook, dook, dook. 3 knocks, and then 3 more, herald the arrival of a newly repaired Mr. Babadook book, this time with a different story printed on its pages. I'll wager with you. I'll make you a bet. The more you deny, the stronger I get. You start to change when I get in. The Babadook growing right under your skin. Oh come see what's underneath. Amelia burns the book after she reads it again, but it's far too late for anything to stop the Babadook. But at this point in the film, we're all left wondering what exactly is the Babadook. Is it truly a monster, a figment of Amelia's imagination, or something else? Well, we do learn what it is as the film progresses, and it's eventually made clear to us that it is indeed a real entity, as its presence is felt not just during its invasion into the Vanek home, but after the threat of it is quelled and Amelia locks it away in her basement. And as this very real creature, what it really is a monster that sneaks its way into the home of someone experiencing unfathomable amounts of sadness, stress, and disillusionment with life through its children's book to feed on those emotions, cause discord in that home, and eventually possess the body of the person experiencing these things so it might kill those closest to them and destroy their life further than it already had been by leaving them alive to suffer the after effects of its reign of terror. That is what the Babadook is. But more important than what it is what it represents: grief. I touched on this earlier, but losing a loved one is one of, if not the hardest thing any of us have to experience, and the grief that follows is nothing short of torment. The Babadook is that grief personified, and its invasion into the Vanek home and what it does to Amelia is a perfect example of how terrible and tragic experiencing grief like this is, and what it can do to your life when it's left unchecked. Now, as variable as each person's grief is, more often than not, the grief a person experiences follows a pattern known as the 5 stages of grief, and those stages are in order: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And as Amelia contends with the Babadook's incursion into her and her son's life, we find her going through each of these stages. Sometimes it's the case that a person will experience each stage in order, but most of the time, it's true that each stage will either persist in some way as the others play out, and the order that they appear will vary quite a bit. In Amelia's case, there is a certain order to her stages as far as denial, bargaining, and acceptance go, but as for anger and depression, those stages either follow her constantly or make appearances at certain intervals in this story, with her depression not just shown to us in her sadness, but in the disheveled and unkept nature of her person and her home, and in actions like taking a bath fully clothed while staring off into the abyss. That being said, the first stage we see Amelia displaying aside from her ever-present depression is denial. However, Amelia isn't in denial about her husband's death, for far too many years have passed for her to still deny that fact. But in the beginning of the film, we do see her denying that she still has a problem with his death, and that she has a problem with her son, and the constant reminder of her husband and his death that he is. It's this denial that then sets the stage for the Babadook's emergence in her life, in the form of his signature book, and the insistence of its existence by her son. And because the Babadook is a representation of grief, it makes sense that she denies its existence as much as she denies the existence of her grief. Her son's insistence that he exists inevitably leads to her becoming angry as he begins acting out and behaving in odd ways once this creature has managed to enter their lives. And as the people around her fail to help her, or even worsen her situation, and this anger only gets worse as the Babadook continues to poison her mind against herself and her son, she begins to lash out at her son, first following her niece's party, as we discussed earlier, and again when her co-worker and prospective lover comes to visit her. As the Babadook begins twisting her mind against her son, we see more manifestations of anger. As after these first bouts of anger towards him, she next gets angry with him after she loses her job for calling in sick, and after she's laying down to try and get some much needed sleep. As it's here that her son comes to her with an empty stomach, a fridge bereft of the food he needs to fill it, and a request to have his hunger satisfied, one that she responds to by screaming at him and telling him to eat shit, with her final displays of anger towards her son occurring once the Babadook has fully taken control of her body and begins berating Sam incessantly until he manages to get the better of it and ties his mother down in the basement. And even then, it continues to show its wrath when it attempts to choke the life from him. The bargaining stage comes into play when the Babadook manifests as her husband and tells her that they can be together if she brings him the boy, something that can only occur should she take his life as well as her own, stating to Samuel that she wants to take him where his dad is and that it's beautiful there, a bargain that would end both her suffering as well as his. Now, as typical as experiencing grief through these stages is, what isn't typical about Amelia's grief is the fact that it's amplified by a monstrous personification of it. And that monster, while being a perfect allegory for real grief, is able to make it all the more worse by throwing Amelia into a whirlwind of hallucinatory and emotional experiences, and in the very real incursions by the Babadook into her life as she slowly loses her mind. She spies the Babadook's clothes and claws at the police station when she goes to report the reappearance of its book at her home. When she returns home to her disheveled and poorly kept kitchen, she finds several roaches that she traces to a hole in the wall behind her fridge, something that's confirmed to be a hallucination when two people from community services arrive to check on her and her son and find no such hole. In short order, she then finds the Babadook lurking in a doorway in her neighbor Mrs. Roach's home, in a bizarre film she's watching late at night as she tries to keep this entity from entering her dreams, and then again while driving with Sam on top of her car. This is when the Babadook, now safely inserted into the darkest recesses of Amelia's life, begins to accost her on all fronts, in her conscious and subconscious minds, and in her waking and dreaming worlds, whispering to her in a demonic voice to increase her levels of paranoia, all of which slowly erodes her sanity until finally, after days walking through the world with no more than a few minutes of true sleep, this monster completely takes control of her body and turns her into a violent and erratic woman who ends up murdering her dog and nearly murdering her son. But it takes the love of that very same son to release Amelia from her torment. While she struggles to end his life with her hands around his throat, rage plastered across her face in a beastly snarl that chills your very bones, this dying boy does the unthinkable. He reaches out to his mother and caresses her cheek, an act of compassion and care that he had been showing throughout this saga, but the one that finally reached through the darkness clouding her mind to pull her away from the Babadook's grip and spill its evil out from her mouth. Then, and only then, is Amelia finally ready to face her fears, ready to confront her grief and deal with it when she was previously unable to, defiantly standing up to this monstrous creature and declaring that if you touch my son again, I'll fucking kill you. What comes after is acceptance, acceptance of her son and all his quirks, acceptance of her life and the absence of her husband in it, and most importantly, accepting that the grief she feels will always be a part of her, but so long as she keeps that grief in check and allows herself to feel, never again will it become a monster ready to destroy her life and the lives of the ones she loves. As much as the Babadook's inroads into Amelia's life in this story were very real, everything that it does in this story is but an echo of what can actually occur when one is experiencing an intense form of grief. Grief, like many a negative emotion, is a poison, one that forces your mind to travel in places that it would be disgusted to tread if it weren't laden with the despair it instills within us. It can cause you to lash out at those closest to you and resent them, to think awful thoughts about them and treat them awfully, to forget your life and all that you're supposed to do to make it just that, and to act in ways that are a great harm to yourself and all those that surround you. Thus it is that the evil in this story is not a monster and not even the grief itself, but what can happen to you if you allow grief to overwhelm you and consume your life. For as hard as it is to come to terms with the horrors imposed upon us by this oft unforgiving world, come to terms with them we must, whether that be with help or on our own. For to wallow in our misery will only cause it to grow stronger as time goes on, until you no longer recognize yourself and grow to become an umbrous bastion of despair that drags all around you down into the hell that you've built for yourself. As true as that is, there is a secondary evil in this film that feeds the pain we all have to feel at some point in our lives, the sometimes uncaring and callous attitude of those that are supposed to care for us and help us. Dealing with Amelia's grief must have been a tough thing for her sister to endure, something that negatively impacted her own life, as she had to witness her sister slowly becoming a shell of her former self. But to declare that the sanctity of her own world was more important than working through her sister's issues with her only guaranteed that her life would spin further out of control, and so it did. Law enforcement officials, social workers, and teachers, like anyone, are prone to judging books by their covers and using those judgments to form untrue opinions about others that then cause them to err when performing their duties, hurting those they're charged with caring for in the process. But it should never be the job of someone in such a position to judge, only to listen, understand, and do what they can to ensure the people they're supposed to care for get the help they need when they need it. And yes, sometimes those people will lie and manipulate you, causing you to become jaded and cynical over time. But the actions of the bad should never be allowed to ruin an honest person's chance to find the aid they desperately need in this world. Everyone is wrapped up in their own world and in their own problems, and it's often easier to identify the problems of those closest to you as stains on your own existence that you're better off without, rather than a person you need to be there for. Those in positions of authority that are meant to help you or your children are wont to follow protocol, judge you and the actions of those in their care based off a first impression, and make their biases the deciding factor in choosing whether or not to offer you the help you need. People who only seem to see you and accept you when you're in a good place, and who shun and ostracize you when you show even a hint of struggling. And that is the secondary evil of this story, an evil that comes from without that's just as impactful as the primary evil we witness coming from within in this film. And it's only when we allow both of these things to rule who we are and how we handle the world around us and the people who live in it that these evils truly become evils. And then, and only then, do the monsters of our worst nightmares become realities. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you enjoyed. What are your thoughts on the Babadook? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you liked this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, my members, anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and especially Elijah Kai VA, our Dark Lord channel member, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.